Welcome to the most essential metric video that I never thought I would ever do. Quick story before we get started. I have a really complicated relationship with metrics. I never liked them, was trying to avoid them as much as possible. Why? Because they never really made sense for me. Obviously, I understand what a metric is, so it's a simple equation. But they never really made sense to me in a business context, because usually metrics are used in a very weird way. So you stuff them in a dashboard and everyone looks at it and says, oh, look at this, the visits have changed. But there's always something missing after that. So what does it mean? Yeah, visits have been increased, but okay, what does it mean for our organization? Always, it felt like there were parts missing. So my usual job with metrics when I was working on analytical projects was mostly revisiting what kind of metrics the company was using. I was telling them a little bit why this metric maybe is not such a good idea, it's a bit problematic. So company says, okay, we are optimizing on bounce rates. And I say, look, bounce rate is a really weird metric, hard to optimize on, and it doesn't really tell you a lot. So I had a cynical view on that. But I was also not really happy because obviously there was something missing. So in theory, metrics should be great to understand how your current organization status looks like. So how is growth going? Do you run into serious issues? Do we have to make some important decisions? Metrics can do that. So if you use them regularly, let's say in a weekly, monthly check-in, looking on core metrics, it's great for steer something, but it's rarely used like this. Even when examples out there, so there's the Amazon weekly business review or weekly metrics review. So there are formats out there that every company could just apply, but still not so many do that. And one of the reasons that I believe is because metrics sound easy on the surface, or they look easy on the surface, but they're much harder to set up. And it took me really long to understand what makes it so hard that to pick metrics that actually work for your business. And you already see that the video is quite long. I'm trying to explain why it is so hard, what you can do. So like we are really going into the fundamentals, so what makes a metric, and based on the ingredients, what makes a metric, we are figuring out what are the two core concepts that you have to make sure that they are in place to really understand how to find the right metrics for your business. So I'm already telling you the two contexts because you have to keep them in mind. So one is relationship, the second one is context. So you will see this when I'm talking in this video. You will see this all the time. We are talking a lot about relationship and we will talk a lot about context. These two are essential to implement successful metrics in your company. So let's get going. So obviously metrics are really powerful, but again, they are very complicated. So let's begin. We have to start a little bit with the two planets. On the left side, we see the planet of the data and analytics teams. These are people maybe like you when you are a data person or analytics person, or on the right side, we have the planet of the business people, like people working in product, marketing, sales, finance, or management. So maybe that's you when you're watching and you work in this kind of area. So I'm positioning both on two different planets for a reason. And this is because they think pretty differently. And not only think, they also have very different problems and things to solve. So on the data side, we think about things, okay, how can we actually measure something? How can we track something? So we put a lot of effort into this to find a good measurement. I get later to this, why this is so essential. Then obviously we care a lot about data quality. So no one of us wants to present an analysis or wants to build a dashboard and then after 2 weeks find out that one of the core metrics that people are starting to use actually has some real flaws. So we care a lot about this and we spend a lot of time on that. We also want to make sure that any pipeline that we have, so that get our measured data from somewhere to a place where we then aggregate it, that they are all working and that they are all functioning. So this is important for us because like also no one likes dashboard where someone figures out, look, the revenue metric hasn't moved for days. Maybe something is wrong. We don't like that. And then obviously, because people ask us to build dashboards for them, we think about, okay, how can we translate everything into really good dashboards? So this takes up a lot of our brain space. On the other side, on the business side, they have totally different challenges. So the marketing team have to think about, okay, actually, where do we put our marketing budget in the next quarter? Does it actually work how we did in the, I don't know, this last 2 quarters? Do we have to change something? Are we doing a good job? Then obviously management is asking, hey, we definitely need more revenue. For that, we need more leads. Go ahead. Please get this for us. And then you have these conversations all the time where you sometimes as an analyst sit in between where, let's say, marketing and sales says, look, our problem is that the product sucks. We cannot get we can really get a lot of leads, but nothing is converting. And then product will say, man, it's actually not our fault. So the leads that you bring in, they don't really fit to our tool. So we are actually optimizing for the wrong audience. So we have a disconnect. In theory, as an analyst, you could help there and can say, okay, look, we can run some numbers, but it's actually not that easy to do. So these are 2 different, very different scenarios where these 2 people live. And when people live on these 2 scenarios, we often try to find something that can create a common ground between this. And let me go here. We made the decision at some point to say, okay, dashboards are actually what's overlapping us. So dashboard is basically the common ground where we exchange our, let's say, thoughts and ideas between these 2 worlds. So the analyst, the data people prepare everything for the dashboard. The dashboard tries to support business with the questions that we had up there. So maybe we really have a dashboard where we can see if the leads and the product are actually disconnected. And don't get me wrong, there is a craft that can build excellent dashboards. There can be a dashboard that actually really makes an impact, but it's extremely hard to do. And in the end, we are there. So the dashboards are basically like how we communicate with each other a lot. And in the worst case, it's really like the only communication that we have. So business writes a ticket, say, I need this kind of dashboard. And data creates the dashboard, sends it back, and then we know what happens. Everyone else sick of building dashboards no one wants to look at? Yeah, of course we are. And honestly, I didn't have to look very long on Reddit to find this post. So there are plenty of them. And when you talk to data people, this is a common thing. So this is preaching to the choir. So it's not really something new that we build a lot of dashboards that actually no one is using. And honestly, it's not really anyone's fault. Maybe, and this is a hypothesis that I formulate in this video, is maybe it's just the format of a dashboard that makes it so hard. Because the dashboard already assumes a specific context and situation where you have to analyze something. So let's take back the example that we had in the beginning. So product and marketing are fighting over the lead and product constellation. So this is a very specific context and problem. So an analyst can go in there, create maybe even a dashboard or maybe a report on the analysis to figure out, okay, yes, we really have a mismatch between both and we have to solve it if we want to grow. This works perfectly, but it's a custom creation. It's not that the analyst creates a lead and product fit dashboard that you can reuse all the time because things will change. So business is changing constantly, really constantly. It can be on a monthly base, sometimes even on a weekly base. So in theory, you have to adapt the dashboards all the time to follow up with this. And the problem with a dashboard is like, there's already a lot of context incorporated. So maybe we just have to find something which is a little bit less context. But we will get back to context. So metrics need context too, but still, it's a more atomic. We make dashboards based on metrics. So in the end, like when we want to take a step more down on a more atomic level, we end up with metrics. I want to run with the hypothesis here that we say, okay, maybe metrics are the better piece that sits between data and analytics and between business. And I have a little bit of experience that can support that. Again, I don't really have a good relationship with metrics, but 1.5 years I was starting to reinvestigate. I never felt happy with doing a classic engineering job, so delivering a data setup to the point where someone has to create metrics to that. So I did this for quite some time because it's a comfortable position. It's the classic data engineering position. So you just build something until you would say, okay, technically we are ready here. Say, okay, this is my hands off. From now, it's up to you. Do the best things with it, and here we go. Yes, this can work, but it was never something that really made me happy, that really kept me happy with the results that I deliver. So I always know that I basically just don't go far enough. And at some point I said, okay, I really have to do this. So I cannot always stop there, really, because I saw the clients that I'm working with struggling. They were like, oh yeah, I think we have a good setup, but what's next? What should we do with it? So I spent more time on thinking about, okay, what do we actually do with the metrics? I reconnected with metric trees. You find, I think, 2 or 3 videos on the channel as well where I'm talking about metric trees, but you will find one video where I did a session with Abi, and Abi was someone who was pushing the concept of metric trees, made it popular again. We will get a bit to the history of it, so it's not a new concept. So metric trees are around for 100 years. And I actually was working with them during university. So I started to reconnect with metrics by rediscovering metric trees. And we will get to the point why this sparked some energy back into me, because metric trees introduced something that was missing from me. I started to do projects differently with that. I said, okay, I have to lead the projects with metrics up front. So we started with workshops where we define all this. So we define metrics first, and from there we take every other steps to build the setup. And I really saw how it changed the conversations. So for the first time, I could have a room with, and I had these meetings where everyone from the company was there. So startups, 30 people. And so we had all the different disciplines. We had sales, we had engineering, we had data, we had marketing, we had customer success. We were talking about metrics, and these were the best conversations I had so far in these constellations. Because, interestingly, metrics is something that everyone can talk about. We can say, okay, look, we want to measure the activation of users. And so we break it down how we actually want to calculate this. And this breaking down is something where everyone can contribute to, can say, I'm not really sure if users are already activated there, so maybe we have to go a step further. And then you can agree, and then in the end, it ends up in a formula, and everyone understands it, so it's one sentence written down. And everyone can see, okay, this really makes sense. So I collected over the last 16 months, I would say, enough evidence that metrics could be a really good alternative to dashboards. Obviously, we have to visualize metrics, so it's not that dashboards are gone, but it's more like that we put more effort into focus on the metrics first and then look how we visualize in different kind of contexts. And you can also see a rise, not really a rise, but at least you can see now some BI tools coming out that are metrics first. So for example, you have something like real data, which is really metrics first, and I use it a lot now in projects, which is really nice. You can define the metrics. And they do a lot about metrics exploration. So you do the solid metric definition, and from there people can go and explore it in the different ways they need. So this is my pitch or my prep talk for taking metrics seriously. But if we want to do this, we really have to understand it. And this is like what the whole session here is about. Let's go into it. So we have to create some foundations about metrics. So I'm a person who doesn't really like a lot of definitions. So I'm not really in love with academic definitions because it takes a lot of time. I can see the benefit in it, but I'm not the person for that. So I'm doing a bit of, how to say, shaky approach with defining metrics and going from there. But this is more like I want to build up a specific narrative and I want to build up a specific picture, and for that it worked quite well. I checked Wikipedia, what most of the people might do, to see, okay, what are some definitions about metric? And so when you click the link down here, you will see, okay, there are plenty of it, because metric is a common concept across different kind of categories. So a metric can be a mathematical metric system, so something completely different than what we are talking about. So I was more looking into the economic part of it, and here I found this one for performance indicator. It's a measure of an organization's activity and performance. So What I like about this, because it gives me at least 4 nouns I can work with, and we will do this in a second. So we will look into measures, we will look into activities and performance, and let's quickly go on organization. I also like that we call it here organization, because obviously in most cases we use it in a company context, but yeah, metrics can work everywhere. So you can be a non-profit organization, or you can even try to do it at home. I can tell you from my experience, it usually doesn't really work to get your family agreeing on metrics, but it's worth a try. So maybe it works out for you. But so organization is the centerpiece. So everything happens within the organization. But now we have to look in what actually does it mean, measure, what does activity mean, and what does performance mean, so that we can build up some building blocks. Okay, let's start with measure. And measure is an interesting thing. And I would say it's often overlooked when we talk about metrics. So the measure is the foundation of every metric. And it is an invisible foundation, because we often, when we look at the metric, we don't see anything of this foundation anymore. It's not there. But the thing is, the data that I can measure from where I build this metric, I can measure it in completely different ways. So I have this very extreme example here where I say, okay, I can measure some data, for example, with web analytics, and I can measure some data with my P&L. On this side, we're talking about super solid, super tested, super approved metrics. When the company has a problem here, it really has a problem. So you can be expecting that metrics that are coming from here are extremely solid. Can you use them everywhere? No, you can't. We're getting back to the concept of context. We're getting back to this. But still, here we are just looking on the quality of measurement. So on P&L, we can trust this. If we can't trust the organization. So we trust the organization, therefore we trust the P&L. Super good metrics material. So when you build this on top, you can be sure. It's also like when you have it on the dashboard, you can say, okay, look, this metric is basically calculated based on P&L data. People will say, okay, sure, cool. I will trust it more than the stuff that comes from web analytics. So web analytics on the other side is a script running on someone different's computer in a browser that we don't have control over. And we cannot guarantee that this is measuring everything. So even like in a best case scenario, you will never collect 100% with a web analytics solution. So everyone who runs e-commerce knows this. When you measure purchases in your analytics tool, it will never be the purchases that in the end you will have in your P&L. So there will always be a different, which is just technically. And so there are different ways how you can measure things. So you always have this that you have to make sure. You really have to understand what is the data quality level of your measurements. And it's completely fine to have some metrics in there that come from a not so good measurement, because some metrics express something different. So for example, we look into visits. So we want to see, okay, how much volume do we have on our online store? But in the end, we don't get our money from visits. It's different when we have advertisement business. So then this whole thing changes a little bit, let's say. But in an online store, it's totally fine. So we're just looking into the visits as a potential that we can convert into purchases. But it doesn't matter if there's, let's say, a variance of 5 or 10% in this. If it's 50%, obviously we have to think about it. So again, this is the important thing. So we have to really understand where our metrics are coming from. And I also recommend this if you write documentations about metrics, which obviously I recommend, put this in. When I create a metric definition or metric documentation, I always have source information in there. I always say, okay, we source this metric from here. And this is how we prepare it and how we transform it along the way. But the source information is essential because it already tells us something about the metric without knowing anything about how we actually calculate it. So first step, important to know, how do you measure the metric? Second thing is, like, we're talking about activities. So in the end, we want to measure specific kind of activities. And I think this is always something very important to keep in mind, because it makes metrics much more approachable. So when you build metrics based on activities, people understand them quite easily. When you have something like account created, everyone has an idea what account created means. It also enables you to make the definition really good, because you define what actually does account created mean for us. Or you can have something like customer created, so you can define what does actually customer created for us. So this is a nice example. Customer created. You have to make two definitions. First of all, what do we define a customer? So when is like this kind of record flagged as a customer, and what is the creation time? So what has to happen that this is actually happening? But when you nail this down, you have a super solid definition for a new customer metric where everyone can look up, and usually people then understand it because like it's connected to the business processes. So when you simply work in analytics, or like me, often in product analytics, then the metrics are actually really deeply connected to how you collect the events. And that makes it a really nice interconnected system, which also makes it really easy for people to understand it. So therefore, activities are really good, and you can always derive it from there. And you should define them. So define activities well, then defining metrics is already done to 30-40%. And then we look into performance. And performance obviously is an interesting thing because like performance is this wobbly thing that no one really knows what it is. And it's highly connected to metrics. We have KPIs, which are key performance indicators. Interestingly, people have 200 KPIs, which makes the key already a bit complicated. So KPI definitely has a branding problem because no one really likes to talk about KPIs anymore. But the measurement of performance is an important aspect. This is why we do the whole thing. We want to understand a specific performance. But I think something that makes it hard for us is to really understand how do we actually define performance in a company or in any kind of organization. So you have to do some work around that. So when we take a classic profit company, we can say, okay, the goal of a company is to make and grow profits for the shareholders and increase the return on investment. At least this is how I learned it at university, so I assume this is still true. So this defines how we see performance in a company. So this is one metric. So for example, we can have return on invest, or if we don't want to make it so complicated with return on invest, we can also just go for the profit. So I will show a tree, a DuPont schema tree a little bit, which has these metrics. So then it makes more clear in about 10 minutes. But let's say, okay, we go with profit. So as long as our company is profitable, we are in good shape. And so we can optimize this. So that's one metric. Cool. So the big question is now, can we run a company just based on a profit metric? And I would say the short answer is yes, I think we can. In the end, we can look on this metric, and as long like on a monthly base, it's positive, all is good. But obviously it has some problems. So I think maybe if you were listening to it, you might have cringed already, but I'm not so sure if this one metric is really enough. Yes, so it definitely has some problems if you run the whole thing only just on net profits. So maybe you have to make some decisions. So if we go on the most atomic business, like the lemonade stand in front of your house, and you just run it by net profit, which means it's like you have one box where you collect the money, that you take this money to buy your new lemons and how you create stuff. And so when you just take this box, obviously, if this box is filling up, you're doing a good job. And so you can run the lemonade stand definitely on that. But if you want to try to optimize your lemonade stand, you might have to look on different things. Or let's take a different example. When we have a CEO telling us, like in the meeting, so have everyone sit down, marketing, sales, product, development, and so on. And they say, okay, guys, it's pretty easy for us. So just go out and make more profit. So everyone will be sitting there. Yeah, sure, makes sense, but I have no idea what I should do. So as a salesperson, how do I make profit? I can make revenue to some degree. I don't know how I don't know. Everyone would be, I don't really know what to do. And so this, I don't really know what to do, is a problem of metrics. So when you have a metric sitting there and you look at it and someone says, we have to improve this metric, you should have an idea what to do. And so this brings us to a different concept that is very important for metrics. And because like it already lays a foundation to a next step where we get to in roughly 5 minutes. And so this is the concept of input and output metrics. So the profit obviously is an output metric. So this is a result of something that is happening. So what comes out of the system? And so when we see our company as this small little tiny black box here in the middle, so then we have stuff that we can put into this system. So for example, everyone who's sitting in this meeting room obviously is an input. So we hope that all the people can solve to here on the output get more profit. But there are other inputs as well. When we talk about metrics, we can view them as input metrics or as output metrics. And so when we look in the e-commerce example here, it's pretty straightforward. So we have online store visits, which is a classic input metric, and the output of that we get, the visits, is online store revenue. So that's quite straightforward. So now we have two metrics. And when we now go out and say, look, we have to increase the visits to get more revenue, honestly, at least like for the marketing team, this already sounds quite, well, yeah, this is what we do. We have some ideas how we can increase the visits. And the interesting thing is, this is not a static system. Online store revenue is quite often an output metric, but there can also be scenarios where it's an input metric. Sounds a bit complicated, but okay, let's look at another example. So when we take the online store visits, now, let's say we move to another meeting. Marketing sits down and says, okay, we have to increase our online store visits. How do we actually do this? So we might introduce another metric that is leading to it. So we can say, okay, online store visits are our output metric. So this is the result that we want to have. We want to increase this by 20%, but what do we have to do before? So again, we're breaking it down to make it more operational. And then we introduce a new input metric, which is ad platform spend. Because there's definitely correlation between ad platform spend and online store visits. The more we spend on ad platforms, the more visits we get. Now we flipped it a little bit and made this to an output metric and this to an input metric. So what we see already is like we are creating relations. So right now with input and output metrics, we just create a relation between two. We will expand this in a second. But first of all, at least what helps me, this is definitely a mindset thing. So I love to think about things in systems, and like the factory assembly line is a really beautiful system. So I often try to think when I approach things from the data side as a company like a factory with an assembly line. Let's say things can be brought into, then be in front of the assembly line and then run through things and then something comes out. So you can do this. Based on that, we could put the ad platform spend here, and then we could put this one here, even when the arrow looks a bit weird. And then we already, look, this could be assembly line. So we just push stuff in here, it creates this, and then it creates that. And everyone who's run e-commerce was like, there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong in here. It's not like that you just spend stuff and you just get more visits. Yes, that is true. So maybe we need some more metrics to make it more visible. Again, it's a tricky game. So the obvious immediate reaction would be like, these arrows represent black boxes. So this is a black box. I'm going from online store visits to online store revenue. This is a black box too. So every time we create an arrow, we build a metric tree in a second. So every time we add an arrow, we basically introduce a new black box. I would say our human reaction to a black box is, I have to understand the black box. I have to open the black box and see it. So one thing that I have to warn you from, because I did some experiments with that, to go really deep, to open up every black box that appears. Obviously, when we start to open up this black box and we introduce, let's say, a model in there, we open up 6 new black boxes because these are all the errors that we were drawing. So there is an infinite amount of black boxes around. You have to cut off, and you have to cut off as early as possible. So don't go in the rabbit hole to basically break this down into such a complex system of metrics, because the major thing where metrics can help you is like to get from metrics output, so you look at a metric, to operations. So you do something with the output of the metrics or the result of the metric. The operation part is essential. So when you build a metric system that is not operational, you basically missed the whole thing while you build it in the first place. Always keep this in mind. So I still like the black box, a metaphor, and also shining light into black box and using metrics for that. But be careful how many black boxes you want to open up. At some point, you can just say, okay, yeah, that's fine. Just as a side note. Okay, let's move on. Let's do a quick input and output exercise. So you can think a little bit about, okay, we have new accounts. So what could be inputs that are going into new accounts? Obviously, this can be visits. So we need to get people on our website to create a new account. It could also be, for example, we are a B2B case, it could be a demo. So we could have a flow where people usually take a demo, or we just know that when people take a demo, they're more likely to create a new account. So these can be different kind of input metrics that are leading to new accounts. When we look into output metrics, obviously, let's say we are a subscription business, we will get more subscriptions when we have new accounts. So you cannot get a subscription when no one has created an account. Yeah, okay, there are business models where this is possible. So you sell something first and then people have to set everything up. But okay, let's assume in a normal world, people at least have to use the tool that something is happening. So subscription can be an output from there. When we look into sign up conversion rate, so what could be an input to that? Obviously, again, we need visits, and the output then obviously are sign-ups. Because like in the end, visits plus the conversion rate is the equation to sign-ups. We could also have something even before. We can say, okay, we have engaged visits, which means like we qualify. So we already do a little bit funnel here. So we can say, okay, people have to at least go from visits to engaged visits. So they check out at least 2 or 3 pages. And from there, they most likely will go to sign up. And therefore, we get a sign up conversion rate. So when we look into customer acquisition cost, so what do we need as an input? Obviously, we need the acquisition costs. So when we don't have costs, we cannot really do something with it. And obviously, we need customers. Let's say we have new customers. You can always think a little bit about the equation. So this is already formulating the equation that we need to use to calculate the customer acquisition cost. So we take this, divide this by this, and then we have the customer acquisition cost. So what can we use with it? So for what kind of output is it useful? Obviously, it can be useful to calculate LTV to CAC metric, which is one of the, let's say, quite used metrics in a software as a service business. Or we can calculate the months to, in the end, like you calculate how many months does it take you to equal the customer acquisition cost with customer lifetime value. You can also create a rate of it. So you can say, okay, what is the third month's LTV to CAC rate? This gives you really interesting metrics that a software as a service business is working with, because mostly it tells them something how effective they can use new capital or new cash that comes in. So we always have these kind of relationships, but what if we take it a little bit further? So first we have to acknowledge, and I told you, like I have 2 concepts that we will repeat here all the time. And one is relation. So metrics need relation. A metric alone is pretty useless. And when you just think about it, yes, we will talk about the North Star metric. We have to talk about it because there are plenty of misconceptions. So when you immediately thought, well, wait a second, what about the North Star metric? I have an explanation for you why you thought that the North Star metric would be an alone metric, and it's actually wrong. So a metric that stands alone doesn't really work. And if you have an example where you think a metric can stand alone, can work really well, please add them in the comments. I would love to hear about it, but I so far didn't come across an example where I can say, okay, this metric alone really makes sense. We need a relations around this. So we potentially need the outputs, we need the inputs, maybe even more. So just spend 5 minutes on why metrics fail, because this is one of the reasons why it fails. So you put the metrics alone, but there are, let's say, adjacent problems to that. And we have to talk about one thing that is really important, and this introduces another concept, the context. Most of the time, at least most of the companies I know, how do you pick your metrics? So you check what others are doing. So you go to Google. Oh no, maybe nowadays you go to ChatGPT or to Claude or to Gemini and put in, okay, I have a software as a service business. Can you please tell me the 10 metrics that I really have to check every week to see how our business is going? And then it comes back. Look, these are the 10 metrics. Here we go. Or you have these very, how to say, I don't even know in which category to put these LinkedIn posts about, oh, I analyzed 500 software as a service startups and I compiled all the metrics that makes them so successful in this extensive software as a service metric guide. Please comment with SaaS metrics to get, I think these posts go viral. So they have 1,000 comments because everyone, yeah, metric, please give me the metrics. The huge problem with that is you have no context about these metrics. They are completely out of context. It's like even when you would listen to a presentation, someone on a conference talk has, look, these are the 5 metrics that we use to be really successful. You have no idea in which situation they are. You have no idea how they work with the metrics. You have no idea how they came up with it. You have no idea what is the environment of this company. You have no idea how they work in the company. You have no idea about anything. So you just see this metric, but you have no context. And keep context in mind. We will get to this. I have a really good example later on where you really understand what makes context so important when you define metrics. But first, keep in mind, when you just pick a metric out of the metric catalog somewhere, it's useless. You have to load it up. You have to adapt it that it fits to your current situation where you are or where your company is. Then the other thing is, we already mentioned, is like when a metric is not connected to any kind of operations, the action, it has no value, because then in the end you just look on these metrics to say, okay. It's like these reports that sometimes are sent around, like this Excel file. Okay, we have so many app installs. Everyone's looking, oh, well, we have so many app installs. Cool. Okay, let's see what I get next month. And then you see, oh, the app installs have dropped, so I have to write them back. What's up here? The app installs have dropped. What happens there? Honestly, as long as you have no idea what you do with the app installs or what kind of impact it has on the business, the whole metric is completely useless. So you don't even have to think about it. You don't even have to ask why the installs might have dropped or might have been increased, because you don't know. So one thing, which is like a good exercise for every analyst, is when someone asks you, hey, I need this kind of metric or I need this kind of dashboard. And then is to ask the question, look, okay, we can get up this metric, no problem. But let's assume you have this metric, and let's say this metric has increased by 20%. What are you actually going to do with that? This is a super interesting conversation. It's not about blaming someone else, or it's not something about, let's say, make them look stupid. No, it creates interesting context. When you ask someone like, okay, you say, okay, so we have let's take the bounce rate. So we have a bounce rate of 60%. So let's say the bounce rate jumps up to 90%. What will you do with that? It will trigger something on the marketing team to think about. And say, maybe we have to really test different landing page messages. Maybe we have to refine the campaigns. Maybe we're sending the wrong campaign audiences to the wrong landing pages because people are starting to drop off. So then, okay, now we're talking. You use bounce rate as an early signal if you have a match between campaign audience and landing page. That is great. This is something where bounce rate really works really well. So now we are talking, and now you're building up context. This makes the whole thing so important. So keep this in mind. When someone comes with a metric, or even when you define a metric, think about, what do we actually do when this metric is changing? It's a good question. And then I think the big thing is, when we're coming back to the relations, is like, so you have no idea how to improve it. So again, like someone says, okay, we have to make more revenue. And then, yeah, of course, I would love to have more revenue. Totally agree with that. But okay, what should we do? It's just breaking down. I mean, with every problem, what you have, you break it down in the other parts that make up the problem. This is nice with metrics. So in the end, because we are building, just breaking up the equations, or what I said in the examples before, we're just opening up the black boxes. And this is something where metric trees are super helpful. So let's have a look at them. Let's talk about metric trees. So first of all, it's nothing new. It just became vogue again. And I'm not even sure how vogue it still is. So there was a time where, I don't know, a year ago or so, where I could post something about metric trees on LinkedIn, get a lot of people reacting to this. I can create a video about metric trees, which I did, and get a lot of views on it. So it had some pull. I'm not sure. I will see with this video if it still has some pull, but let's see. But again, it's not something new. So we have the DuPont model here. So you can also look it up here on Wikipedia, DuPont analyzes. So this was created roughly 100 years ago, or quite some time. And in the end, this is a metric tree. It just explains how you actually can calculate your return on investment. And this is like on a very high level. This is like how a company operates. So you have all your assets, like your investments, and here you basically have your P&L. And from there, you can analyze, okay, we do so much profit, we had so much investment, so how is our return on investment? Does the whole business make sense? When you work in finance or investment, you still operate on this. Everyone who works in a company usually doesn't really look at this part up here and also not here, but we definitely look in here. So this is already a metric tree. Then we have a little bit of a problem that it has different names and flavors. It always happens that, I don't know, someone picks it up, wants to bring a specific spin to it, give it a slightly different name. So we have metric tree, we have KPI tree, we have driver tree. I think the DuPont one is more like called driver tree, but don't nail me on that. In the end, they are all relational models of metrics. They have different kind of flavors and they want to define things slightly differently. But in the end, you take a metric, you create a relationship to another metric, and you might even create a relationship to an initiative. So you can say, okay, look, this initiative is trying to improve this metric. You point an arrow to it. Relation. Okay. So don't be confused about it. In the end, like, just use the term that works best for you. Then you have two things which right now is just important to know. You don't really, let's say, have to, this might be a different video. So you have a deterministic, I call them deterministic, not sure if someone else calls them then, algebraic. I'm not even sure if you write it like this, but okay. But you understand this. So this, for example, is one. It means you can break down the whole tree in an equation. So I could write this whole thing as in an equation. And so then I can analyze the different kind of factors in this. So this is like a deterministic tree for me. So in the end, like, you break it down. I like these kind of trees because like they are easier to build and also like they're easier to validate, because in the end, you just have to see if you can write it as an equation. If not, then yeah, the tree doesn't really make sense. There are also probabilistic trees. So what does that mean? So in product, for example, you can have active users. This can be a metric that is very important for you. So as long as you define it properly, active users means you have thought a little bit about what people should do to become an active user. But let's say you do this. So active users definitely has a relationship to retained subscriptions, because if someone actively using a product, we can assume that they are quite happy to keep paying for it. So there is a connection between both, but you cannot really express it in an equation. It's pretty hard to do because it's not really deterministic. But here, for example, you can have a probabilistic model where you can say, okay, look, we have that many active users. We can assume that this has, when this change, it has this kind of impact on retained subscription. A bit more, let's say, at least for me, it's not really a data scientist, much more complex. But there are tools, for example, who try to do this. All right, theory is great, but practical stuff is always better. So let's build a tree together so that you get an idea. So I like to have really good use cases, so I always come up with a fictional one. In the age of AI, this is pretty straightforward. I can just put in a prompt and say, okay, look, this is what I'm looking for, and then it comes back with a really nice story, which it did here. So we just have been to Nîmes during our holidays. We really liked it there. We liked all the Roman stuff there. So I came up with the idea, okay, there's like an artist, Celine, so she creates prints. Let's say she takes Roman patterns, Roman symbols, what else, and she creates really nice, really beautiful prints, and she started to sell them locally. So she started to on the markets in Nîmes and let's say around. Then she opened up, let's say, a small shop next to the Colosseum there, and so she's starting to sell stuff there. And it worked really great, and she has a lot of fun. And obviously, a friend then recommended, hey, why not you sell it with an online store? So she starts out with Etsy, works really well. So she gets orders from basically all around the world, which is really cool. And then someone else tells her like, yeah, Etsy is great and so on. But on the other hand, you have to own your customers. So she creates a Shopify store. The nice thing is you can easily create a Shopify store when you keep it simple. So she does that. She starts selling theirs too. So now she has two distribution channels. And it works really great. She makes 3,000 to 4,000. So she deducted from the cost. So she's very cost efficient. She can live off that. So she stops working in her regular job. So she's really focusing on the business. So it works out really great. But now someone else tells her, maybe you want to really understand a little bit more how these two different parts of your business are going. And she just looks at her bank account. She says, oh, money looks good. But she thinks that maybe I can really grow more. I want to have a higher revenue, gives me more security. I can build up some cash so that when orders go a little bit down, at least I have some space there to not, I don't know, start a job again. So she needs more insight into this. So she can now start to look into some metrics to really understand how things are going, where she can potentially improve things. And so we can start here with an extremely simple tree. I will not build it live. Let me just pull it over here. So I would say this is the simplest tree that you can build for a transactional business, which most cases e-commerce is. So we have something like total revenue up there. I get to first, obviously, extension here in a second. So let's say we're just focusing on the revenue side. So we have total revenue here. Then the revenue is built up by the total purchases and the average order value. And the total purchases are basically constructed by the website visit and the conversion rate. So we already have two key metrics here that a lot of online stores are optimizing on. No, three to be sure. We have three input metrics where we can do things. So obviously we can try to increase the website visits. For example, she can hand out flyers when she's going around the Colosseum to give it to people. Say, look here, cool, look, great print. You don't want to buy it now because you're traveling. It's annoying and so on. But look, here's my online store. You can just order it there. I send it back home. So you can do it today in the hotel. When you come back, it's already there. So that's great. And I give you a special discount. So then she can try to increase website visit with that. She can introduce different pricing. Also, maybe she introduced very limited series. Yeah, you just get 100 of these, but they're higher price, so they basically cost double, but they're more special. So with that, she can try to increase the average order value, which have an impact on the total revenue. She can try to make the website more streamlined, so she can apply some best practices to increase the conversion rate of people coming in there. So these are three things where she can already translate this into operations, which is great. So now she feels more enabled to do stuff with it. This metric tree completely ignores the cost, for example, the COGS, like cost of goods sold, which obviously you should bring in because this is another optimization. So when we would bring in the COGS, so we might have it here, and then we have the total profit here. So then it gives her more optimization. So for example, she can think about, can I improve my process, how I print these things? So is there a way to make it, let's say, to drive down the cost of each print? Because this gives me a higher margin and this gives me more flexibility to do stuff. With a very simple metric tree, let's say this and potentially three more metrics on the cost side, she can do a lot of stuff. But we can even take it a step further. And there we're coming already to the concept of context a little bit, because we were talking about she has two distribution channels. Right now, we just put everything into one. But maybe you really want to understand what these distribution channels are doing. So let's do that. So when we break it down by distribution channels, we have a slightly different view on that. So what we see here now is we have two branches that is driving revenue. So one is the Etsy branch, the other one is the Shopify branch. We even introduced two proxy or helper metrics with share of Etsy revenue and share of Shopify revenue. Why is this helpful? It's helpful because she can now understand how these two distribution channels are contributing to everything. She also gets more insights into how they perform. So for example, she can compare the average order value on Etsy to the average order value on Shopify. So she might have the hypothesis based on what her friend says, like, when you go for Shopify, you can optimize on a higher average order value. Turns out she now recognized that Etsy has a really high average order value just by default. And so she's, oh my God, okay, maybe the marketplace is much better for me than it was, because let's say based on just telling something, someone could come up with the idea, no, Shopify is super important, you really have to focus on that. Maybe not. When you now break it down like this, you always have a view on both distribution paths, and you will see, okay, now actually Etsy is really growing strong. Really, it's one of our big driver of our business. Shopify is great. I mean, it works, but it doesn't go like this. And so you don't make a wrong decision by saying, maybe I should really just focus on Shopify. No, you identify, okay, I also have to focus on Etsy. So this is something where metrics are super helpful. And again, this is where the context is helpful. Without any context, we might just build this up here. It works. But with context, it makes totally more sense for her. So if you would present this to Celine, say, look, these are the metrics you should look at, she would say, yeah, that makes sense. This is how my business looks like. So cool, that's great. But let's take this even further. I mentioned context. So context is very important. Each company situation is unique. And I say situation on purpose here. It's not like that we have your company situation now and we build something for it and it will never change. It changes quite quickly. You change strategy, I don't know, 1, 2 times, 3 times a year when you start up every 4 weeks, or different levels of strategy. So you do stuff in your business all the time where you change things. So obviously your setup for metrics has to change with this too. And here comes something really important. One thing that I learned is like where metrics really catch on is when we define them that they fit to the current situation the company is, and when we fit them to the strategy they are trying to execute. When you have a really good metric setup that adds up to one metric that shows how the strategy is rolled out, but then also have the input metrics that are leading to it, the adoption of this metric will be significantly better than when you just go for a generic model, because everyone sees, okay, look, because everyone is talking about the strategy, and then now they see the numbers for it, and now the whole thing makes more sense. So let's break it down in this example. Celine is super happy, so she has product market fit. She has 1 employee already, which is herself. So she doesn't have to work. She has a solid distribution. She already has 2 distribution channels, which is really good. But she has an inner feeling. So first of all, she wants to build up a little bit more security, but she has another thing. So she meets with her friends and she tells them, look, it works really great. My life, really cool. And they are like, oh yeah, come on. I really hate the job in the bank as well. I would love to do something like this. And she thinks, it would be really great to work with them. So why not? I have this one friend, she's really good at organizing things, so she could do the whole logistic things much better than I do. And she hates her job, and I love to be around with her. So she has this inner feeling that she just wants to give more people a job, her friends. Let's say, if friends and a job, so good idea, different topic, but let's go with that. And we could also say, I just want to have more people, give more people the opportunity to work. So she wants to give more people a job, which is, let's say, a personal goal. Then we can put it into strategies. Okay, for that, we have to increase the monthly revenue because obviously we have to pay for them. So when we grow the monthly revenue to 20K, which would be like a 10 times jump, what she has now, or an 8 times, then she can hire 2 more people. That's great. Okay, at least she has a perspective. So we have to get to 20K. So how do we do this? So now we are breaking down strategy into operations. And again, we are just developing some hypotheses. So she develops 2 hypotheses. That is always important to know. These are hypotheses, not a roadmap set in stone. So we might have to adapt it because, yeah, there could be a different kind of things that work out. So she can say, okay, actually, I want to start advertisement. So people tell me it's a no-brainer. So if you want to grow, you potentially have to take a step into advertisement. So she has a friend who has really, she's working in a marketing agency. She then comes up with some tactics that she wants to test. So first she wants to test the typical Instagram ads. Her friends tell her, super great for discovery. People are just scrolling around. It's very visual. This works perfect for her prints. So she wants to go into this. Totally makes sense. She also has a connection to 2 influencers, right? Not big influencers, but still good influencers. They post a lot about regional stuff. So they are, let's say, people follow them to see nice things about the Provence. So maybe, yeah, we can just try it with them. So these are the 2 tactics she wants to try out. Then she wants to figure out, okay, I already have 200 customers that ordered something. Maybe I can find things that they might want to order again. Oh, we're starting to look into customer lifetime value. So she think about, okay, I want to introduce some limited seasonal editions of specific things. Maybe also test out products beyond the prints, so maybe cups and so on, so that in the end people can Romanize their home. But to do this, we want to extend customer lifetime value. This might be harder on Etsy because, yes, we have some connection to our customers, but we don't have them in our database. We have limited possibilities to basically speak to them, reach out to them. So therefore, she said, maybe it's a really good idea to get more people over from Etsy to Shopify. Etsy performs super well for us, and we don't want to disturb the channel. But still, Etsy becomes our acquisition. So we want to acquire people on Etsy, and then we move them gradually over to our own shop, and there we basically expand their home with our products. So she thinks about to give a really high discount, Like when she sends stuff out to Etsy people, she gives a really high discount. So to move people over to Shopify. So these are the tactics she wants to test. It's experiments. We don't know if they work, but she has to see if they work. So we have to make a metric setup that makes it possible for her to understand if they work or not. So let's do that. So now we change our metric tree a little bit. So we expand it a little bit. And obviously it takes a bit more work now to bring this all in. But we introduce something under Shopify, which is interesting. First of all, we just assume that the ad-based traffic just goes into Shopify. It would be a valid experiment to run it into both, run it also into Etsy. This would make the setup even a little bit more complicated. But so far, we just take the thing that everything runs into Shopify. But we do one essential thing here. We now break down the Shopify revenue by organic Shopify revenue, which is just the rest. And then we also look into former Etsy revenue. And how do we do this? Because we use a discount code. So now we can say when someone shops with a discount code, these are former Etsy customers because we just use this discount code there. And we assume that it's not leaked somewhere, put on a platform and so on. We can rotate them on a monthly basis. But this makes it easy for us to attribute the revenue. So we can see what kind of share our people are moving over. We can even calculate an Etsy to Shopify conversion rate, which is really cool. So we can see, look, now we can, let's say, build this funnel. Okay, we get 100 new customers on Etsy. 20% of them we move over the next month to Shopify. So this gives us a model to play with. And then we have the ad-based revenue. So we have some very simple attribution. And so there we can see, okay, who actually came from the Instagram campaign. We can do it with discounts again from the influencers. We can also see, okay, they're actually coming from the Instagram campaigns that we are running. And there we can see the impact of ad revenue. And there we can see, okay, it might really grow significantly. So we can validate if this is really, let's say, a way to go forward. And this gives us a check-in on a weekly, on a monthly basis to immediately see, okay, how do actually our new strategy, how is working out? And we can start to, maybe we figure out that it's really hard to get people from Etsy into Shopify. It's not actually really worth, so we just stay with towards. It could be an outcome of it, but we see it really early. It's not like that we dream up this world for 6 months and then someone runs some numbers and figures, it doesn't really work for this. We could have recognized this earlier. So again, with this setup, we build something that is very custom to the current situation that this business is in. It will change in 2 months. She runs a different kind of experiment. Then we have adapted to it. But we have to make this visible. So this, like these metrics here, we might have, let's say, conversion rate and so on, maybe here, but maybe not to have too much. But this up here becomes the most important thing that we look on every week. After 4, 6, 8 weeks, it changes. We adapt it a little bit. But this is why I said it's so important to have context with the metrics. This is like why when you just take a generic one, it often doesn't really resonate because people don't see the company's situation in there. When you build something like this, you see it. And I can tell, like, it's not a perfect system. I don't tell you, like, when you do this, that everyone immediately becomes data-driven. There's still work to do to achieve that. But I can tell you from my experience, when you create something like this, it makes it much easier for the company to adopt that. So we take a cut here. So in the end, what I want you to take away from that is when you think about metrics, think about relationship and context. Build a metric tree. And one thing about metric trees, there are people who think metric trees are the greatest stuff on earth. We use it for everything. We even just build only dashboards with that. We only use that. It can be fine. For me, metric trees is a strategic instrument. It is operational to some degree. So when I do my stuff, I usually have a weekly check-in on core metrics, and I sometimes look on the tree, but sometimes also just look on the spreadsheet where I have the metrics on the tree because I know how they relate to each other. So I then take out the metric tree when there are some questions about, okay, why has this dropped? Then we can look on the metric tree. It's a nice map. We can see, look, we are dropping conversion rate. On the other hand, we are increasing website visits because we're running advertisement. It's quite of expected that when we start to run advertisement that the conversion rate, the global conversion rate goes a little bit down because we're bringing more people in who might not be ready to buy yet. So a metric helps to explain this, makes it more visual. don't over-engineer or make a metric operational for now. So I think there's not enough validation, or let's say enough in there to really achieve that. But it's great. It's great to create something that can really helpful. It's also great to find the metrics that are really relevant. I want to finish up with looking at two frameworks, because you might have already have the question about, oh, but they are metric frameworks, they work really well. So I want to introduce them now. I didn't introduce them in the beginning because I wanted to have you the foundation first, because you will find the concepts in that we just developed in these frameworks as well. And I think then the frameworks click more. So let's start with the North Star metric. And I already mentioned, like, the North Star metric is something where people immediately say, you said one metric doesn't work, what about the North Star metric? The interesting thing about the North Star metric is, I don't know where I have it, the North Star metric is actually not the North Star metric, it's the North Star metric framework. And the North Star metric framework consists usually of 5-6 metrics, because, yes, you still define a North Star metric, like this one that leads something, but you also define input metrics that are leading to it. And this is often wrongly understood. People just look on the top one. They don't look on the other ones. The top one with the other ones, like we have it here, like it's not really about finding this one metric. It's more like finding a constellation of metrics that work really well together. The other thing, so first of all, I highly recommend, so I will put this link into the description. I highly recommend to go there and read it. So it's on Amplitude. The book is available on the web, so you can just read it there. You can download it as a PDF. John Cutler wrote the book, and he is one of the best minds that you have, especially in product analytics. So he spent a lot of time working with a lot of companies on North Star metric frameworks. So this is the best thing that you can read about it, and read about it before, and also recommend it to people who just throw around North Star metric very casually, that they understand. Because one thing that you really have to know about North Star metrics, this is not so much about revenue, what we just did. So in the end, like the thing that we did so far was always leading to revenue, more like a business perspective. The North Star metric framework looks more into the value that the company creates for the customers. Obviously, this is connected to revenue, but still it's something different. Value to customers is a very different kind of relationship that you can have. So in the end, we want to create a map that shows us how we are creating value for the customers. So the North Star metric that we will pick on top will represent the value. Therefore, we will not... Our customers don't care how much money the company makes for us. They care about something else. And this is what a North Star metric represents. So when someone comes to me and says, like, yeah, our North Star metric is totally, I was like, no, actually, it's an important metric for you, business-wise, but it's not a North Star metric because it has no customer value. It's basically potentially an output metric of a North Star metric, because when we make the customers happy, it results in a higher total MRR, but it's not the North Star metric. Again, this is also something important. I will also put the link in here. The North Star metric, like I described it with our strategy. So here again comes our context and strategy part again. It's like it only persists as long as the strategy holds. When the strategy changes, the North Star metric, it can change 3 times a year. It's not that something like you run with the same North Star metric framework for all the time. So it changes a lot. So obviously on the top you have a North Star metric. I give an example in a second. And then you have input metrics that are leading to it. So you always need both. You cannot have just one North Star metric there. You have to have 3 or 5 contributing inputs. I think when you saw the metric tree, you understand why. So I think then the whole North Star metric framework makes more sense. So again, this is something that John wrote. I love this really much. It's like words before numbers. Sit down and define. Sit down what you actually mean with this. Talk about customer value an hour more than you thought that you should. This is so important to bring it in, because this makes the metrics really strong. Again, we are talking about the measurement. How should we actually measure it? What kind of activities do we bring into to define this kind of value? These are super important conversations. And if you skip them, your North Star metrics are not really good. Then I love this again. John is a perfect person to bring down these things. It's like you have this North Star cycle of doubt. It's not that you come up with this and you think, oh my God, this is God-given. We just have to run with it. It's a constant rechecking. So you define a North Star metric. It's also the same with the metric tree that I have. You define it, you run with it, you think, it's okay, but these parts are not good. We cannot do something with these metrics here. We have to change them. You adapt them constantly. You always look, can we work with it? Can we not? Refine it, and so on. Okay, quick example, frequent content sharers as a North Star metric. So the number of unique subscribers who share an average of 2 or more articles per week during a previous 12-week period. You can see this is a very precise definition, and it takes time to come up with this. So this is for a newsletter, or let's say you have a content portal. But this definitely tells you something. Okay, this has a value in it. We are right now looking at Excalidraw. We looked at Miro examples. For me, for example, a very simple North Star metric for Miro obviously is like how many boards get shared. Why this is more a North Star metric? Because when someone is sharing a board, they are quite happy with the board and they are happy to share it with someone else. So there has been a value created. This is a very broad definition. It can be even nailed down. So it can be even more specific, but this is the exercise of North Star. But you're looking for value representation. So you try to create a proxy metric that can explain if the product or the service is delivering value. This is what makes it so important. All right. A second framework, also like one which is really powerful, and I worked a lot with it, and it always comes up, are the pirate metrics. So again, like pirate metrics, what does it mean? We look into 5 areas where pirate metrics exist. So we look into acquisition, into activation, retention, referral, revenue. Here you can see, for example, the North Star metrics is usually something that sits here for activation or retention. North Star metrics doesn't really care about acquisition, also not about revenue. Sometimes about referral, but again, this might be more a side effect of this. So why does it help? Why are pirate metrics good? Because when we look a little bit on the tree here, we have parts of it represented in here. So this obviously here, this is acquisition. Total revenue is the revenue part. What we don't have in here is retention or referral because we haven't broken it down. We could break down, for example, the revenue into new customers, returning customers, loyal customers. This is something which I often do in e-commerce. Then we have retention in there because then we can look into returning customers and loyal customers. Loyal customers are just returning more often, spend more money. And we can look how we can build up these buckets. Then we basically come back into the pirate metrics. So why I'm showing you this, because this is a great framework on top of it, especially when you look into product. One thing that I want to give you is it's built on top of that. It's a variation on this. If you look into product metrics, this is something to check in. This is basically the concept of user states. Analyzing a product is really hard, but when you look at it from a perspective of user states, you can basically see how users go through a journey. I use a slightly different model than this, but this model works super fine, and there's a really nice blog post that you can read about it. I put it also in the description. So like we have new users can become current users. Current users can become at-risk users. At risk means is like on a weekly basis, usually I just have an at risk thing. So this means it's like someone was a current user or an active user. You can also call current user active user. So they did something, but they now stopped doing it. So you classify them at risk. And if they continue not doing something, like say for 2 months, you start to call them dormant users. You can still bring them back. So then you have reactivated users. So you can bring back someone from at risk. So they stop using your tool for 4 weeks. You bring them back, however you do it. But now they're starting to use again, and so you can call them reactivated users. You can also potentially bring them back from dormant, so they haven't used your tool in 4 months, but now they start using it again. You have resurrected users. You can connect all this also like to revenue. Obviously, potentially current users can become new subscribers. So there's a connection from there. So you can calculate this. So this is a precursor for revenue. This is a super interesting model if you want to make your revenue metrics more solid. So these are early signals if your revenue is at risk. So when you have a lot of people in at risk or in dormant, so obviously this is a risk for your revenue because these people most likely will unsubscribe at some point. We don't have to go so much deep in this, but this metric system can really help you to understand something. So with revenue and acquisition, it can look like this. So this is, for example, a model that I use often in subscription where you can see, look, here we have the acquisition. So we get new accounts in there. then we hopefully at some point convert these into new subscriptions. But obviously, like the activated or the activation rate has a really impact. Here, the dotted lines are probabilistic relations, so we could quantify them to some degree, but we can also analyze this, like how important is it to have them activated to come up with a new subscription. Or in the end, like you can analyze, okay, from the new subscriptions, how many of these were activated accounts and how many of these were non-activated accounts. This already tells you something, first of all. So if you have 50-50, it might be that your activated account definition is not really good, because it's weird that 50% who are not even activated end up in a subscription, or you have a really scammy subscription model, whatever. So it can tell you a lot of different things. But this in the end explains this has a lot of pirate metrics included. So here we have acquisition. Obviously up here we have revenue. We have retention here. We have activation here. We don't have referral in here because when I look for software as a service, it often doesn't really have referral deeply built in, but it could be easily be extended here as well. So therefore, the pirate metric, also like the North Star framework. So the North Star framework, by the way, would sit somewhere here, like active accounts and activated accounts. So this would define, for example, this. So like this would be a zoom in on these two. So these frameworks can help you to construct a general model that explains your business. So this is why I showed it to you. But this was more like, let's say, a quiet journey to see where you can get it to. But let's go quickly back to what is the most important takeaway from me. And just let me show you the right example. Let's take this one. Metrics can be powerful when you create relations between that. This creates a lot of relations. So all these arrows create relations. Also, as we described already, all these arrows create black boxes. So there's an arrow from here, purchases to revenue, where we have also like the average order value. You could open up the black box, could introduce more metrics to really understand what is actually driving the AOV and what is driving the purchases. So I mean, here in this case, it would mostly like looking into what is driving the AOV. So you could do a product analysis. So what are people actually buying? What they are often, like people with a higher AOV, what they are actually buying together. So this can be one-off analysis. So you open up a black box, you try to understand a little bit more. Then you go back, again, what we had here, you go back to formulate a new strategy, you formulate some new ideas, how you want to implement the strategy, and then you come up with some tactics to try to test. And then you always have this nice loop between this and this. And this is what makes metrics so powerful. So the whole video is actually a pitch to try more with metrics. The video is a pitch to build up, define better metrics, to come up with these nice metrics here, like former Etsy revenue, which you would not put it somewhere in a metric collection because it's very specific to your situation. But for this situation, it's a very powerful metric. And so I want to motivate you to find these things. I want to motivate you to build these models, to understand how your business is operating. Honestly, when I was starting out with metric trees, one thing that I did is like I was looking at different kind of companies when I saw them on LinkedIn or somewhere else, someone posting about it, just thinking about, okay, how can I model them out? So what would be the most basic metric tree look like for them? And then once I had this, I mean, you will see this repeat pretty quickly. But then the next step is like, I look at, okay, what is their strategic direction? So where they're trying to go, where they're trying to grow. Sometimes they post this on their blog or have it somewhere else. And then I was trying to break this down. I was sometimes trying to take new feature releases to see, okay, how do I actually want to express this feature in a metric tree? So to which higher level metric does it connect and how would you measure the feature? You can do a lot of interesting stuff. It's a really nice, so I always call it like, it's a bit like doing Sudokus or crosswords. This is an alternative as an analyst. So this is basically the analyst crossword. So you have, I don't know, you have an hour of spare time and for lunch, doodle a little bit with the metric tree. It's a great exercise to do. And again, like if you were skeptical on metric trees like I was, maybe this video brought you back and then I would be super happy. So let me know, again, you saw this already when you started the video. It's a long video, but I want to give you a lot of context that you can understand what you can do with it. And if you have watched until here, I would say, man, this is really great. So then I'm really happy. If you like If you have questions, add a comment. I'm sometimes a little bit slow when it comes to answering comments on YouTube, so don't be frustrated when you don't see something immediately. Usually when I see it, I answer. And yeah, subscribe to the channel so that you can see the next video. I'm planning to do a lot more of these explainer, longer videos. So stick around to see other things where I'm trying to break down things to make it more accessible for everyone.